I'm coming to you from South Melbourne. This is the I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to extend my respects to all First Nations colleagues who may be following this pre-summit, really. And the purpose of this question that you were looking at will be introduced in a second. I'm not going to speak too long, and I took this invitation really to make a kind of a provocation for you. Part of the story is about the moment and this actually hard question that why we are not seeing more progress, although we have had more data and information and evidence about how the systems work around the world, and we have been trying hard with different reforms, but things just don't seem to be getting much better. So I'm going to speak about a couple of things and then throw this back to the facilitators there to lead the conversation, and I invite you to be actively engaged through this wonderful technology that we have. And Ingve will actually speak probably more about this artificial intelligence part. So I'm going to share with you some of my notes so that you can see and follow what I'm going to say. So these couple of things that I want to speak about. The first is going back to this question that you were looking at, that why is it that we are spending more resources and energy and money in education, but we seem to be getting less and less back, at least if we are thinking about what the numbers and statistics and international comparisons say. And the first question, of course, is that what do we know about the education system's performance? And again, this comes with a strong assumption and note that we are not measuring. We don't have evidence and data about everything that schools do, that we have to rely on these traditional statistics and quantities that we are looking at. So let's keep that in mind, and always remember that if we were looking at schools' performance in different areas of education or learning, we might have very different things. But this is what the for example, the OECD's data through the program for international student assessment is saying, that if we go back to year 2000 when this story started and move all the way from here to the latest set of data from 2018, we can paint a picture that looks something like this, according to the OECD and those who have been working on this. We have seen a little bit improvement in the beginning when these measurement cycles were introduced, and then there has been decline. It's not necessarily a huge, but it's a very clear clear trend downwards. This happens, by the way, with the many other assessments. When the national assessments have been introduced here in Australia, we saw the similar thing, that things were improving, then there was a plateau, and then in many ways things go downwards. In England was the same thing, and many other places. So there's nothing new in this. But if we include the spending here, it depends a little bit on what type of measures we are using, but here, this blue line here, we represent the kind of a per capita spending. In other words, how much money is spent per student across the different countries. This is mostly including the OECD and some of the associate member countries here. But there's a clear trend that the education is becoming and has become more expensive. And this is exactly the question that you were thinking about. And this is exactly the question that often people and politicians and media here, for example, in Australia, has been asking, that why is it, what is behind these kind of inconvenient trends that you see here. I'm going to give you another one that is equally kind of a problematic and difficult to accept, and definitely difficult to explain what has been going on. And this comes from the same set of data that we and the governments are regularly using from the OECD. So in the first OECD PISA measurement in the year 2000, this is what we saw when it comes to the this achievement difference between the most affluent quarter of students or their families and the most disadvantaged quarter. So we are looking really at the socioeconomic gap here and the performance difference between those two quarters. It equaled about 3 years worth of schooling at the age of 15. So it's a significant kind of a learning difference, if you wish. The significance of this picture here is that we have known this challenge and issue across the globe really for the last more than 20 years. Now, of course, there are many reasons to kind of assume or expect that something would have been done to this thing, because this is really something that we don't want to see. I'm going to show you what has happened during the 20 years. And so this is the trend according to the OECD's statistics, that the same 3-year gap at the age of 15 in this measurement has remained pretty much unchanged, and at the same time the performance has declined. Again, important question is that why we have not been able to narrow this gap, although there has been many efforts by international organizations and many governments as well to address this thing, but not much really has happened in this respect. So, the next notion here is that some people might conclude that this situation that we have now in many education systems or global education, if you wish, is something that has to do with the global pandemic that we have experienced. It's still going on, of course, in some places. But if you take a look at the global evidence and data just before the pandemic 3 years ago, what these key international organizations were reporting about the global education, we actually cannot come to any other conclusion than this poor situation was there already far before the pandemic came around. And I'm saying this, these kind of conclusions from the World Bank and OECD and UN and some others to make the point that we should not think or make people believe that somehow this situation with the inequalities in education or poor performance or declining performance of students in many ways in many education systems is because of the pandemic. The pandemic has actually probably made these things just worse. So now, of course, the question is that why is this happening? This is, and thank you for your responses, because they were exactly to the point. And some of those things you mentioned there already, the wrong reforms or wrong drivers to try to improve the education. This is my number one response to this question that has actually often been asked me here when I'm one of those here in Australia who's looking at the global education developments, not only here in Australia, that we are probably have been working on wrong reforms or wrong drivers in trying to improve education. Then the other one that you also mentioned was that there's a growing bureaucracies in education or administrations, at least countries like here, that we are seeing more and more staff hired to the departments and all kinds of educational offices and institutions to basically just look at the administration and bureaucracy of education. And this has both increased the spending in education, but also took resources away from the real work that is often those people who work in a classroom and schools, like teachers and principals. And then probably poor investments. And part of this may be because of the technology that has been extremely expensive and seems to be expensive. And we all know that what has happened with these investments is not always contributing to what teachers do or students, how students learn. So there may be some other things, but I'm just making my point here that as educators, we need to be probably even more aware of these questions and answers now when we are moving to the future where there will be less resources and less funding. That's my view on education in general. Globally, there may be some exceptions, but in general, this will be the situation. So let's look at the good news now. This could be the opportunity for doing a bolder and bigger and like a real change in education that many people have been kind of waiting for and asking for many years. And my question here is that if it's not now, then when? What is the right time? I think the right time to really think bigger and bolder than before is right now. This window when we can really expect a kind of a more success in this bolder thinking about how to change schools and education for the future is not going to last forever. It's going to be, this window will be open for a while, and that's why it's so important that we act. And another question here could be that if it's not you, then who would do this? This is really something that we need to think about. So a couple of things about this context and the role of engagement and democracy. The question here is that, so what role does the context play when we are looking at this opportunity to bigger and bolder change? So first of all, I have listed here three things. I think this situation where most of the countries and probably all of you and your education systems and governments are right now is about the global insecurity and these increasing ongoing conflicts and probably conflicts that are somewhere there in the horizon that we still haven't seen. So this is putting all these hopes and dreams that our students and many teachers have at risk in the systems, and raising this whole new kind of a narrative about what is the purpose of schooling. For example, here in Australia, this is a big thing right now. What is the purpose of schooling? And schooling here in this country has remained unchanged for decades, maybe a century. The purpose of schooling has remained the same, but this is something when we are seeing our young people and entire communities kind of struggling with this hope and the dreams of the future, that these questions of what is the education for is becoming more and more at the forefront of the education policy and education reform work as well. So this is something that at least here and probably some other countries, many people are now asking and expecting more work on this. Then the other one is the increasing instability, including the environment, the state of the planet, and uncertainty of young people's lives as well. So we are asking questions like what kind of education we should be thinking of. Ingvar will be talking about the role of artificial intelligence and technology. This is one important aspect of this. But there are many other ways to think about this. What kind of education question should we consider more about the students' expectations and their needs, listen to more their kind of hopes and expectations when it comes to education, or should we just continue offering education as we have done before, hoping it will be more relevant and appropriate and better than before? And then, of course, probably the most interesting and important thing, and a big part of my provocation here, is this growing cost or expense of national health and securities around the world. You probably heard that this country here, Australia, just made a deal last week of the 8 nuclear submarines that will cost about $360 billion Australian dollars during the course of the next 20 or 30 years, which will explode the military budgets here. And in these countries, it's very clear that such a high increase in spending on the national security and defense will be away from education. We cannot touch health because of the pandemic and all these experiences that we have had during the last 3 years. So education will be the target of these savings and cuttings during the next 5 to 10 years, at least it's going to be here. It's going to be the same in Finland, where the country is going to the general elections next week. It's the same narrative. So we need to think bolder and bigger, but also cheaper when it comes to education. Anybody who has a great idea how to improve education system and would ask 5% increase in the education spending will have a really hard and difficult time to be heard and taken seriously, because now it's the time to think about, we have to think big, but we have to think cheap. And then finally, my last point here is that what can we learn from other education systems? I was really struggling about this, whether it's about democracy or technology or any of these things, because there's not really that much that we can learn from, like a concrete things. If you're looking for solutions to some of these wicked big problems and challenges that we have, like my second point here is that nobody knows what to do, and this is a kind of a fact of the situation, is that we are all in this together, and we are not really sure where to go next or what to do. So that's why, the first lesson here really is that we need to have much deeper understanding now about the importance of the context, that how the context where the education systems are operating right now is becoming more and more important when it's about learning or transferring ideas, or policy learning even between the systems. So what works somewhere in one country, one place, doesn't necessarily work elsewhere. And then finally, my hope is here that is at the heart of this, bringing more democracy within education systems and through education in our societies, is to see students as part of the solution. We often talk about kids and young people as a part of the problem, that how do we fix them? But I think we need to learn to think young people more and more as part of the solution, that how we can work with young people for better education and answer some of these questions that I was presenting here earlier, work on those questions with the students. So in a way, of course, the student voice and student agency that have been part of this ARC movement for a long time are extremely important things, but I think we should not stop there, that we need to try to move to this level of co-leadership with young people. Of course, I'm not saying here that the students should be given a freedom to do whatever they want to do or lead the educational reforms and systems as they wish. That this co-leadership, that students are part of the increasingly part of this building and co-designing and redesigning the education system, that students are seen as partners and co-leaders in the direction, is such an important thing. That's the way I see that we can build more democracy in the system.